Hello, and welcome to In the Light, Growing Your Soul with me, Anna Isabel. And I am delighted that my guest today is once again Matthew Wood. Hello, Matthew.
Greetings.
So the last time you were here, we were talking about herbalism and the wonderful extracellular matrix. This time, it's a completely different topic. Because your book is on a very different subject, and it is the seven guideposts on the spiritual path. So I love this because it's looking at Genesis from a shamanic perspective. But before we get there, it might be worth explaining for those who are new to the concept, what is shamanism?
Oh, yeah. Okay. I would say, well, shamanism to my mind is a spiritual path. Oh, hello from my log cabin in cloudy Wisconsin, Minnesota, next to Minnesota. Shamanism is a spiritual path in my mind. So yeah, on the one hand, it's akin to, use of psychic powers or visionary powers, learning of visionary powers, which could just serve yourself. I guess everything can serve yourself or serve a greater purpose of the higher self or the spirit of the universe even. So I look upon shamanism that way as being a spiritual path that really can get us to a more complete consciousness of who we are and where we're going, and make ourselves more complete beings. And the basic premise of shamanism is the unification with, well, one of the basic premises is the unification with, let's see, there's a little ticking going on. Is that at my end or? Yeah.
I don't hear it on my end.
Oh, okay. Well, good. All right. So there it was again. Well, I don't see what this is. Okay, so one of the major premises of shamanism that as a spiritual path is the unification with the animal self or the body with the spirit. And I was just talking to my dad, who's 92, who kind of waited a long time for someone to tell him that was okay. He said, I always felt this way, that the body had to be in on it with the spirit. He's a Quaker, and I was raised a Quaker. So we we learn to unify the two little by little, and that opens up dream time to us because if you follow the Genesis story, the animals didn't fall, we did. We fell from a state of innate connection to the spirit that would be the tree of life, and the animals stayed there. They stayed in contact. They did not change. The warm-blooded animals in particular, they sleep, they dream. Scientists tell us animals sleep and dream. This is true of the warm-blooded animals. And therefore, when we tune into the warm-blooded animal part of us, because we have that within us, then we learn, and we finally get back in touch with dream time, with the spirit world, which I would say is the same thing. That accurate dreaming, William Blake, your poet from London, from south of London there, as he said, true imagination, vision of eternity, true imagination versus fantasy. Fantasy is making up your own images. And so that's also the doorway to spiritual seership, where you start to see the images in your own mind clearer and clearer. Now, there are so many paths that can get you to this, but in all of them, I would say involve revealing the inner truth little by little, because that's what a Quaker would say, and learning that path of inner truth and understanding whatever should come up in your consciousness. I know we're both, you're an astrologer and I'm a student of astrology, or a friend of astrology, or pretty well acquainted with it and can read a chart. So, I mean, astrology too is a truth, is like you begin to see the deeper patterns. And I've always seen astrologers as actually getting, they just kind of get a hit on your destiny or other people's destiny, like easier, even when it's not in the chart so much. I just to give a little anecdote back to your question then, or maybe you can ask another question, but I remember an astrologer saying, she looked at me and she said, Judith Hill, this would be, and she said, have you completed your life mission? And I said, yeah, as a matter of fact, like I had to write the first book on herbal medicine, or the book of herbal wisdom, and I felt complete. I've completed what I came here to do. And she said, yeah, I can tell, like you're just relaxed. You just don't have that drive to, I've got to do it, which, can be a drive on the outer plane. I got to make $1 million, or it can be a drive on the inner plane. I got to complete my life mission. And it's like only an astrologer would really pick up on that. And actually, it was first an astrologer when I was 20 who read my chart and said, you will never be complete until you have written a book. And I knew that second I knew astrology was for real, because I did have to write a book. That was the book of herbal wisdom. And she said, and she just nonchalantly said, oh, Mars and Capricorn in the third house was her reason. But I think there's an attunement to destiny that astrologers develop. Yes.
I like the notion of there being a union between body, an alignment between the body and the soul, the body and spirit.
Yeah.
I read and you talk about this in the book. In fact, right at the start of the book, you're talking about how there's this need to connect the animal side, which I guess is that intuitive, instinctive side. It resonates with astrology, because so many figures in astrology are half human, half animal. So we've got Sagittarius, half horse, half man. We've got the centaurs, of course, these are centaurs, but we've got Capricorn. That's hang on, Capricorn's completely animal, goat and fish. I was getting a bit carried away there. But we do have all of these figures in mythology, which are exactly about that. So it's about shamanism as being about this alignment, or seeking this alignment in the self. What is a shaman?
Yeah, well, I would say there's a crucial bridge, and that is dreaming of your animal self. And if it doesn't happen in dream time, at least it needs to happen in alternate reality, because like the animal self is hidden in that alternate reality, in that unfallen Eden. And we really have lost the hardware that connects us to that, in my opinion. We have to rediscover that, and we just don't take our dreams that seriously, and we don't really realize how important dreams are. First, we don't realize how important dreams are. Then maybe we get into lucid dreaming something, and then we're getting closer and closer. And finally, then we have a lucid dream of the animal self, I would say. And then at that moment, you feel like, oh, that's an animal. I always loved that animal. I always felt affinity, like just above all other animals. That's the one I love the most. And that is very typical of the animal self. Occasionally, some people dream of there's also a reptilian cold-blooded animal self. There's not many varieties there. There's really only 4, because there's lizards, alligators, snakes, and turtles. And that's in the back brain, the reptilian brain. Then the midbrain is the animal brain, and we get our ability to love really comes from the warm-blooded animals. The cold-blooded animals just drop their eggs and poop back in the water. And the warm-blooded animals mate and have young and are dedicated to them and raise them. Actually, alligators also tell their young how to hunt and stuff. But the warm-blooded animals mate for a season or a lifetime. Some of them, eagles, coyotes, wolves. The wolves take care of the elderly, like the young wolves are at the front of the pack, and the old in the back of the pack. And with the more the elderly wolves, they can't get too elderly in that business, and in the middle. So they are They have warmth of heart. We did not. We should not imagine that we discovered that. We humans, we've actually walked away from that to some extent. That warmth of heart, as well as that instinctive life of the animal, as well as that direct connection. You know, it's somewhat unconscious, I think, in the animals. Like when you first dream of your animal self, that's the baby step. But that is the crucial passing over, and that to me, if you're on that path, you're trying to do that, you're trying to actualize that, you're on the shamanic path. If you have that dream, boom, you are a shaman. You have, you know, you've begun the phase. And I remember when I read Carlos Castaneda and Don Juan, who's really that religion is called Nagualism of central Mexico, which is really shamanism. And it turns out that Don Juan's actually representative of a greater tradition, an individual, yes, but he says to Carlos Castaneda, we strive for a lifetime for one insight that changes us, and that I would actually have to say that is how it feels. The only thing it's kind of similar to like fundamentalist Christianity. You're just changed by one thing, and that's true on the shamanic path. You to meld with your animal. And actually, at that time, also, I should say, some people are controlled by the animal more, some people by the human more. We have to strive to remain human too. The deeper you get into the stuff, the more difficult that is actually sometimes. Yeah, that's my definition of a shaman. And from that time on, you're initiated, you're begun in dream time. Yeah, okay. You're a baby.
So how does this relate to Genesis?
Yeah, well, so we go back to, let's see, it's probably being written about 900, the roots of Genesis, 900, 1000 BC. And there just were not, in my opinion, we don't have Buddhism, we don't have Hinduism and the modern, we don't have meditative religions really. We have shamanism pretty much as a universal religion. And the stories in Genesis are not just found in the Christian or the Jewish Bible. Actually, they're found in the Jewish Bible, not in the Christian Bible to any great extent. They're also found in the Quran, some, and they're found in Sufism and in folk stories throughout the Middle East. And they really represented, I believe, originally a sevenfold cycle that tribal people, as they migrated, that they told these stories. They told these stories, and they had storytellers whose job it was to tell the story. They also wrote these down in murals in Sumeria and the civilization. And William Blake says, I have envisioned gone to the patriarchates, kingdoms. I don't think there's not any republics, principalities and governments of the Near East, of the Middle East in vision, of the ancient Middle East in vision, and I have seen the originals of these biblical stories of Genesis on huge murals, almost indescribable, and in statues and in statuaries, conveying these truths. And then that was interpreted into stories and carried with the people who left that center of civilization. And that's how they thought about it. They thought about that as, you know, the center of the galaxy for them. And then they went out into the world and came back once in a while. And that's how we know. I mean, Abraham came from Haran and his father from Ur of the Chaldees and down in southern Iraq, Iran in the north, or in Turkey, maybe right at the border there. And so they had these stories. And who were these storytellers? I am quite convinced that they were the midwives of the Jews, of the Hebrews, we'd have to call them at that point. There is strong argument in favor of the idea that the original storyteller, she's called. So there's 4 different parts of Genesis. One is P, the priestly writer, who's a high priest in the temple in about 500 AD, BC. And one is the Deuteronomist, who kind of does all the genealogies and is kind of like the nerd, and putting the dots on the and filling in and the putting, you know, and arranging it more. And then there's J and E, the original storytellers. J is the Yahwist, Jehovah, that would be, or the Judean, and E is the Elohist or Elohim. He or she is the name Elohim, more. And Jay uses the name Yahweh, and it's almost certainly a woman. Jay is, would be, I don't think that you can argue that, but Jay, there's so much obstetric gynecological detail. Like, first of all, have you ever read any other creation myth story where there is obstetric gynecological detail constantly? Or even anything like, does anybody ever say Eve will be cursed with the pain of childbirth? That's not in any story anywhere, but that's a woman would think of that, like this change of consciousness that occurred. And and then Exodus, which is written partly by Jay too, contains stories about the midwives. The midwives are the heroes, actually. They saved Moses, and they're named by name. So there is, and then there's the Tamar's birth of twins. There's all these births. There's quite a few, at least from, let's see. Well, there's a number of birth stories. Tamar is the only one I mentioned. She's a great grandmother of King David. So I didn't come up with this theory. Someone else came up with the theory that it was written by a woman, and their theory was it must have been a literate woman in the court of King Solomon, one of innumerable princesses who was allowed to get writing material and to learn how to read because they indulged their princesses. Because very few, less than 1% of the men knew how to, less than 1% of 1% of the men knew how to read and write at that time. And it's like, no, no, these stories are from the tent. They talk about life in the tent. They don't talk about life in the court. They understand, different, very, very ancient nomadic life. And then the court, probably a writer for the court came along, and we must interview this grandmother storyteller and save this stuff. And maybe there was even more than one storyteller, but there were two basic strains, J and E. So that's the origin. I can't remember what the question is, but that's important in understanding. Yeah, and who was the people who wrote it? That was part of the question. Yeah.
So I guess the question the answer I was looking for was, what is it? What elements of Genesis do you feel are shamanic in nature? Is there symbolism? Is it narrative, the stories themselves? What is it in Genesis that you see as linked with shamanic traditions?
Well, I would say the whole darn thing, except probably for the genealogies, which were stuck in by the nerd D, and the first chapter, which was written by the Priestley, which some people believe was intended to replace the simple folk tales of all the ancestors as being too primitive. He was more of a philosopher, but he preserved very ancient motifs and things as well. He tells us about the abyss, Tiamat, which is the word for the primal ocean goddess in Mesopotamia, but to him it's the chaos. It's looking into the ocean, you can feel that, being on a boat. So, and their word for boat, ark, is the Greek word, because they were not boat people, argos. So just some perspective here. But so the rest of it is indeed shamanic. I think E is a little bit less shamanic, but still close to the original stories. But J is very much that way. And just to give the basic premise, the tree of life, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, I've come to see, I wrote about this, about the two ways of speech or thinking. One is, we use the Greek because the Greeks named it because they invented logos, so they had to contrast it with what they were already doing, which was phosis, which was to observe. Don't go there, there's a poisonous snake, blah, blah, blah. This is good for snake bite, XYZ. Treat it this way. Just total factual information that is down to earth, like you got to know how to live, and people living in a hunter-gatherer society have to have these kinds of this ability to communicate and just say what is true. And this is how the Native Americans spoke. So it's called honest Injun, it's kind of the stereotype, speaking honestly, the Native American. When anthropologists interviewed the survivors of the Battle of the Little Bighorn, and they wanted to know what happened, each man would only describe what he had seen in his area, and he'd say, "Oh, you got to go see so and so who was in that area." It's like, I'm not talking about, I didn't see it. That's how they spoke. So that's phosis first. There's just phosis. How are you going to communicate? You don't have logic. You're not going to, so you can't set up a premise, a test, a conclusion. That's logic. If Socrates is a man and all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is immortal. Oh, okay, I get it. Yeah, I agree with that. That's not how they can do it. They in phosis, you speak by metaphor or mental connection. So the great speaker in the Greek tradition in phosis was Heraclitus, and he would say the road up is the same as the road down. Yeah, okay, that's true. But it's also like telling you about the rise and fall of empires, individuals, ideas like coronavirus, of situations of your own life. And it's very astrological. It's things come and go. And he says you can't step in the same river twice because it changes all the time.
So
Yeah.
if we do, so what we're saying is that these ancient traditions, which are the roots of Western culture,
Yeah.
speak in a metaphoric language. So
Yeah.
stories of the Old Testament are metaphoric, it's metaphoric language.
Yeah.
That's parallel to the way in which shamanic traditions communicate also.
Yes, because so in shamanism, they always have this secret language. This, I mean, always really, Mircea Eliade, who wrote the book on shamanism, that was kind of the breakthrough understanding 1964. What is it? He didn't totally get it, but he got it pretty well. And from there on, it's the watershed book. And he notes that shamans had this secret language, which he thinks is maybe bird signals and animal signals, how to talk to animals and the birds. And it's actually more like how to talk to animals and birds in your mind, like watch the inner television set. They become conscious of the images that are generated by this true experience of life and the images that we see in between when we're sitting down and just thinking things over. And that's phosis. That has the potential to be fantasy or imagination, the phosic inner speech.
So when you say, so this is something that's, I think, quite an important thing to get our heads around. When you talk secret language, do you mean a language for the purpose of holding power and keeping knowledge away from other people? Or do you mean a secret language as in it's a nuanced language, because metaphor has many meanings to it, and therefore it's open to interpretation? It's what makes it secret is that it's an inner understanding.
Yeah, I would say it's an inner understanding. It's a jump from the factual to the imaginal that's behind that. And it is really used by everybody to some extent, but then you begin, and we have it in our language when we say, horseplay, or he's like a ferret, or snake-like, or foxy, or wolf-like, my, what big teeth you have. We still have many stories that are in fact related to we have many stories and words that date back to this time, and people speak this way the closer they live to the land. Just to give an example, I was out to the rock bottom phosis, just the description. I met a farmer next to my parents' land, and he had a nice mosquito net on that I like, and I said, "Oh, that's a nice mosquito net you have," and he said, I found it in my pasture, so I wear it. Like, period. like, like there was no value judgment. See, there's no value. It's like, yeah, it's great. It's just the facts. So this is the original speech, and this is the shamanic speech is the second layer, is the imaginal layer there. And the whole of Genesis is written that way, virtually all of it, except the little parts that I've shown. Even the priestly part is 7 archetypes in a certain sense. But I don't know about the genealogical parts. um, yeah.
It's like what we're saying is that Genesis is a metaphoric or series of metaphoric stories,
Yes.
which hold spiritual lessons.
Yes. Yeah.
Less about it being, a literal
Yeah.
experience, because that's not how those traditions would have communicated, or it's not their way of thinking, not their way of being. And
Yes.
therefore, if we look at it through a shamanic lens, they make more sense, because
Yes.
are metaphors that are meant to guide and inspire us into a more spiritual way of being.
Yes.
And
Yeah. Yeah. So then the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, I realized even after writing the book, that's logic. That because see, when you have a logical statement, if Socrates is a man and all men are mortal, then Socrates is mortal. You have to agree or not agree. You have to agree. I mean, almost everybody would agree with that. But there's other statements that are not as clear. And we get to scientific, and see, that's the basis of scientific research. Our modern science is that religion. It's like premise, like if the virus acts this way, then we'll take the spikes and use that. And conclusion, spike of protein vaccination. Well, you could have a lot of other interpretations of the virus. And you could disagree with that particular interpretation, but that's logic. But so no, it's scientific. So then, and that's the way. And basically, this type of thinking gets started about 500 BC, I would say. The Greeks, that's when, during the lifetime of Plato, Aristotle says Plato was the first one to use logos to obtain knowledge. Now, Plato understood very well that that was just one way to speak. So he also developed so he developed phosis, and that became the idea of archetypes, which do not show up as clearly in the ancient method. These Jacob, Isaac, Abraham, Noah, Adam and Eve, they are archetypes that we would recognize them as archetypes in a way. Well, Adam and Eve certainly, but they are they're not as enunciated, they're not as clear. We think about archetypes in some ways. Plato also changed the playing field for phosis in our culture too, where we think a little bit more specifically of an archetype. That the ancient people were more into the wordplay. Oh, I see. The realization. Well, more into the aha moment, I would say, the intuitive. But we're working with that too as astrologers today.
We are,
so,
and
yeah.
it's there. In the beginning is the
Yeah.
word, and that
Yeah.
there, and right at the start, because what is the word? It's a means of bringing down idea and express. But then, what kind of word? Are you looking at the world literally? Are you looking, as archetype and metaphor? So I think this is this is a very powerful way of looking at two different worldviews, or of explaining two different worldviews. So I think this is one of the reasons why I really like your book, because it's opening up the Bible stories in looking at them through a different lens, which is always fascinating and so I would invite anyone interested to learn more to find your book, 7 Guideposts on the Spiritual Path. And I'll be putting that in the description box. And Matthew, if they wanted to learn more about your work as a herbalist or about this particular side of your life, shamanism, how could they do that?
Yeah, well, let's see. I haven't always Matthew Wood, Institute of Herbalism, my online teaching thing. There's some stuff on the nature of wisdom and the shamanic worldview and the animal medicines too. The animal medicines are the more ancient thing that became the signs of the zodiac. Yeah. And I guess we're out of time, but one important thing that my friend who taught me about the two forms of speech said that astrology had to originate at a time when both types were in use. And that was basically the lifetime of Plato, Eudoxus, Aristotle, right in there, 400, 450 BC. And I mean, that is really true when mathematics was used and also this lyrical way of thinking. So astrology has a very, very important role in the world.
Well, it's certainly, I think, a very a good combination of left and right brain working together.
Yeah, yeah. Are we finished here at 12 or can we go on since I started late or? Yeah.
We're a bit pushed because I have something else that I need to be moving on to. But well, thank you very much, Matthew, for speaking today.
Okay, well, this gives us a chance to talk later on the stories themselves. We've done the basics here, the two types of thinking and speech, and we'll get to it again. And hopefully you and I can sit and talk too. I'd still just love to. Yeah.
But it's exactly what we're going to do. So to learn more about the stories, you're just going to have to come back. Until then, thank you all for watching. And next time, we're going to stick with animals, but this time we're talking about healing with our animal companions. Until then, goodbye.
Bye.